In the grand and unforgiving world of Regency London, where power was measured not in gold but in influence, there existed a man known for neither mercy nor warmth. Adrian Blackthorne, the Duke of Evermere. His name alone commanded silence in drawing-rooms and dread in the hearts of his enemies. Once he had been a man of charm and conviction, the golden heir to one of England's oldest titles. But betrayal had hollowed him, and grief had forged him into iron. Years ago, his father's fortune had been undone by deceit, a partnership turned trap, orchestrated by none other than Lord Whitmore, a man whose ambition knew no decency. The Duke's father died disgraced, his estates nearly crumbled, and Adrian had spent his youth rebuilding what was lost, brick by bitter brick. When power was restored to his hand, he made a vow beneath the shadowed windows of Evermere Hall that he would destroy the Whitmore name as his father's had been destroyed. It was at a winter's ball held in the mirrored halls of the Clarendon estate that fate began its cruel, unexpected course. Adrian attended not as a guest of society, but as its silent executioner. His plan was simple: ruin Whitmore through his most cherished possession, his daughter, Lady Clara Whitmore. She was the very picture of purity and grace, golden curls that caught the light of the chandeliers, eyes the colour of clear morning skies, and a manner so gentle it seemed untouched by the corruption that surrounded her family name. To Adrian, she was a means to an end, the softest thread in the fabric of her father's world, and he intended to pull until the whole tapestry unravelled. From across the ballroom, he watched her glide through the crowd, smiling politely at words she did not seem to hear. There was something guarded in her grace, as though she lived each day behind invisible walls of duty and expectation. When their eyes met for the first time, it was not the thrill of attraction that struck him, but the haunting familiarity of sorrow, a shadow he recognized, though he could not name it. He approached her, every step calculated, every word rehearsed. "Lady Clara," he murmured, bowing low, his voice a smooth deception. "I've long wished for the honour of your acquaintance." She curtsied, her gaze steady yet uncertain, and in that brief exchange the trap was set. Adrian's pursuit began in earnest. Letters written under the guise of admiration, subtle invitations, whispered promises of protection and admiration. The gossip columns soon filled with mention of the Duke and the Earl's daughter, though no one dared question why a man of Adrian's pride would court a woman from a disgraced family. To society it was romance, to him it was justice. Each time Clara smiled at him, unaware of the storm he carried, he felt the grim satisfaction of control, the slow, patient tightening of a noose woven of charm and vengeance. Yet something in the rhythm of his vengeance began to falter. He noticed it first in the stillness of her eyes, how they softened when she spoke of her ailing mother, or of the children in the village whom she visited in secret, bringing medicine and bread from her own allowance. He watched her in moments she thought herself unseen, tending to a wounded sparrow, comforting a trembling maid, standing alone in the rain to ensure her father's tenants had shelter for the coming winter. She carried the burden of her family's sins with quiet dignity, never defending her father yet, never condemning him either. The Duke, who had spent years sharpening his heart into a weapon, found his certainty dulling. He told himself it was weakness, a dangerous softness unworthy of his vow. But the truth pressed against his chest in the silence of his nights. She was not her father's daughter in soul, and his vengeance was losing its face. Still he swore to continue. He would not falter now. Love, he told himself, was a luxury for those unscarred by betrayal, and he, Adrian Blackthorne, was carved from scars alone. Adrian Blackthorne's vengeance unfolded with the precision of a campaign. His every movement within London society was deliberate, his every smile a weapon honed to perfection. Invitations to tea with Clara's mother, donations to the charities her family supported, appearances at gatherings where she would be seen by his side, all designed to craft a portrait of devotion that the ton would adore. The more people whispered of their growing attachment, the deeper his invisible dagger twisted toward Lord Whitmore's pride. For in those circles of lace and powdered charm, reputation was currency, and Adrian intended to bankrupt his enemy in both gold and honour. Yet as he played his part, he found the game turning strangely against him. Clara's presence began to intrude upon the borders of his carefully constructed bitterness. Her letters, written in a delicate, looping hand, arrived with innocent regularity, filled not with flirtation or ambition, but with gratitude. She thanked him for his thoughtfulness in calling upon her mother, for his gift of books to the village school, for simply speaking with her as though her family's disgrace were invisible. Her words were never dramatic, never pleading, yet each one carried a purity that unsettled him. "You make the world seem less cruel," she once wrote, unaware that she addressed the very architect of its cruelty. He tried to remind himself of his purpose. Late at night, alone in his study, he would read over the old correspondence between his father and Lord Whitmore. Contracts, false ledgers, letters of betrayal sealed with a serpent's ring. The ink had long since faded, but the pain remained vivid. He would picture his father's weary face, the tremor in his hands before he took his final walk through the cold gardens of Evermere. "He died for their greed," Adrian would whisper to himself. "This is justice, not vengeance." But the voice that answered in his mind, quiet and treacherous, asked, "And what of her?" When spring came, so did the turning of the tide. Lord Whitmore, sensing opportunity, began to parade his daughter more boldly in society, proud that the infamous Duke of Evermere sought her hand. Clara, however, seemed increasingly withdrawn. Adrian noticed the exhaustion that shadowed her expression, the way she would look down whenever her father spoke of fortune or advancement. She was not a woman enjoying the attentions of a powerful suitor. She was a soul torn between loyalty and fear, and still she smiled on a soft, brave smile that stirred something deep in him, something dangerously close to guilt. One evening he visited the Whitmore estate under the pretence of calling on her father. The Earl was away, gambling as usual, and Clara received him in the modest warmth of the drawing-room. A fire crackled softly, illuminating shelves of worn books and a piano long out of tune. It was not the luxury he had imagined from the man who once ruined his own father, but rather the weary remnants of a decaying home. She poured him tea with trembling hands, unaware that his heart was waging a silent war. "Tell me, Your Grace," she said gently, her voice breaking the silence. "Do you believe people can change?" Adrian paused, his throat tightening. It was an innocent question, yet it struck him like a confession. "Change," he repeated, forcing his tone into cool civility. "Few do. Most merely learn to hide themselves better." She looked down into her cup. "I used to think so too, but I've come to believe that people carry both darkness and light, and that sometimes it only takes a single act of kindness to awaken what has long been asleep." He could not meet her gaze. In that moment, her words, gentle, guileless, felt like a mirror turned upon his soul. She spoke of redemption, unaware that she spoke to the man who planned her undoing. That night, as he left Whitmore Hall, the rain began to fall, cold, unrelenting. He rode back to Evermere through the storm, his coat soaked and his thoughts darker still. The plan that had once filled him with purpose now felt poisoned. For the first time in years, Woodard the Duke of Evermere could not decide whether he sought justice for the past or forgiveness from the present. The night that would shatter everything came quietly, with no thunder to herald its cruelty. The Whitmore estate was hosting a small supper in honour of Lady Clara's birthday, a subdued affair meant to restore a fragment of their family's dwindling dignity. Adrian attended as expected, his expression carved from composure, his purpose buried beneath the veneer of charm. Yet inside he was a storm restrained, torn between the man he had become and the one he had once hoped to be. The grand drawing-room glowed with candlelight, laughter echoing lightly against gilt walls, but to Adrian the air was thick with ghosts. He watched Clara move gracefully among the guests, offering warmth to all while her father drank too freely and boasted too loudly of connections he did not possess. The sight of her quiet patience, her endurance of humiliation with a gentle smile, unsettled him beyond measure. When the evening drew late and the guests began to depart, Adrian found himself alone in the garden terrace. The moonlight fell over the marble fountains, catching in the dew like tiny stars. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Clara, wrapped in a pale shawl, her expression hesitant but sincere. "You seem troubled, Your Grace," she said softly. "You've been distant this evening." He forced a hollow smile. "Perhaps the wine was not to my taste." Her gaze did not waver. "No, I think it is something deeper." She stepped closer, her voice trembling as though she fought an unseen weight. "I've heard things, whispers about you and my father, that your acquaintance is, not what it seems." Adrian's breath stilled. The game, it seemed, had played itself too far. "And what have you heard, Lady Clara?" he asked, his tone sharp enough to draw blood. Her eyes shone in the dim light, not with accusation, but sorrow. "That you hate him, that you came here to ruin us." She paused, lowering her gaze. I didn't want to believe it. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Adrian could have denied it. He could have offered a charming lie, another smile to deflect the truth. But something inside him, some weary, decaying part of his soul, refused to speak falsehood in her presence. "Your father destroyed mine," he said at last, his voice low and raw. "He left him broken, disgraced, and I swore I would return the pain in kind." Clara closed her eyes, her lashes trembling. The wind carried the faint scent of roses between them. "And I," she whispered, "am the weapon you chose." Adrian turned away, unable to meet the quiet devastation in her words. "It was never meant to be personal," he murmured. Her reply came softly, a single sentence that undid him completely. "Everything is personal when it touches the heart." He faced her then, the full weight of his guilt crashing through him like the tide. She did not weep or rage. She simply looked at him, the fragility in her eyes balanced by an unearthly strength. "If hurting me will bring you peace," she said, her voice trembling but resolute, "then do it. But promise me one thing. When you have taken all that you came for, leave what goodness remains in you untouched. The world needs men who remember mercy." Her words struck deeper than any blade could have. Mercy, it was the very thing he had scorned, the virtue he had buried beneath years of cold purpose. In that moment, he saw himself through her eyes, not as a victor, but as a man enslaved by his own hate. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words refused to form. She curtsied, her composure heartbreakingly gentle, and walked back toward the glowing windows of the house, leaving him alone in the garden, hollowed by the truth. That night, Adrian did not sleep. In the dark solitude of his chambers, he burned the forged documents and letters he had gathered to destroy her family. The flames consumed them quickly, yet the fire within him only grew, a painful, unfamiliar warmth that felt like both penance and rebirth. He realized then that vengeance had been a wound he kept alive to remember his father's love. But Clara's kindness, her unbearable mercy, had shown him that love was not found in destruction, but in the courage to let the past rest. Dawn broke over Evermere like a confession, pale light spilling across the cold marble floors, washing away the long shadows of the night before. Adrian stood by the tall windows of his study, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. The fire had died down to embers, and with it the last fragments of the man he once was. Around him the ashes of his vengeance lay scattered, the burnt remains of contracts, letters, and schemes that had once promised satisfaction, but now seemed as meaningless as dust. The world outside glimmered with frost, and for the first time in years the Duke of Evermere felt something he had almost forgotten. Peace, fragile and trembling, like the first note of a song long unsung. In the days that followed, London society buzzed with speculation. Some whispered that the Duke had broken ties with the Whitmores after discovering new scandals. Others claimed he had grown weary of courtship altogether. Clara, for her part, withdrew from the glittering season without explanation. She spent her days nursing her ailing mother and tending to the tenants who depended on her compassion. To those who pitied her for losing the Duke's favour, she only smiled faintly and said, "Some losses are blessings in disguise." But when the evenings grew quiet, she would walk alone through the rose garden, unable to silence the echo of his voice, the sorrow, the regret, and the pain he had not spoken aloud. It was there, one cold afternoon, that she saw him again. The sky was grey with the promise of snow, and she had come to lay fresh flowers at her mother's chapel when she found Adrian waiting by the old stone archway, his dark coat dusted with frost. He looked different, not diminished, but human. The sharp pride that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a quiet humility that seemed to weigh heavier than any title. For a long moment neither spoke. Only the winter wind moved between them, carrying the faint scent of pine and smoke. "I should not have come," he said finally, his voice low, almost uncertain. "But there are words I must say, and I cannot carry them any longer." Clara stood still, her hands clasped before her. "Then say them, Your Grace." He stepped closer, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots. "Everything you heard that night, it was true. I came to destroy your family. I planned to use you, to ruin you, to take from your father what he took from mine. And yet—" He paused, struggling for breath, as though the words themselves burned. "You showed me something no one ever has. Mercy. You saw good in me when I could see nothing but ruin. You broke the curse I placed upon myself." Her eyes shimmered with quiet sorrow. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I could not live another day wearing a crown forged from deceit." He knelt before her, the proud Duke of Evermere, once feared and untouchable, now humbled in the snow. "I came to ask not for forgiveness, for I do not deserve it, but for understanding. The man who sought your ruin died the moment you spoke of mercy." "I am what remains, flawed, haunted, but free." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She had dreamt of this moment, imagined anger or vindication. But what she felt instead was a gentle ache, a tenderness born not of love's sweetness but of shared sorrow. "You were never my enemy, Adrian," she whispered. "You were simply lost." He looked up at her, his grey eyes softened by the weight of truth. "And will you allow a lost man the chance to find his way again?" She hesitated, her heart trembling between past and possibility. Then slowly, she reached out her gloved hand and lifted his to his feet. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but not through vengeance, nor pity, through kindness. That is the only path worth walking." A silence fell, heavy with something unspoken, not a declaration, but a promise. The snow began to fall gently around them, cloaking the garden in pale serenity. Adrian bowed his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "You have given me back my soul, Clara. I vow to spend whatever remains of my life proving that I was worthy of it." As the chapel bells tolled in the distance, Clara turned toward the light breaking through the clouds. Beside her, the Duke of Evermere stood, not as her pursuer or her penitent, but as a man reborn. Together they walked toward the estate gates, two souls once bound by vengeance, now set free by mercy. And though the world would never know their story, the snow bore silent witness to the moment vengeance gave way to love, and hatred finally learned to kneel.